Thank you. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. After the Israelis bombed the Osirak reactor outside of Baghdad in 1981, I wrote a book called Nuclear Peril, The Politics of Proliferation on that raid, and all of the other proliferation issues that were related to it, that is the U.S. and USSR, Ronald Reagan, et cetera. They were just engaged in a crazy vertical arms race where we weren't making each other safer, we were making each other less safe. MX, Pershing, all the way down the line, and the Soviets were building the same weapons, and it was crazy. And the point that the Israelis were making is we should focus on the fact that the IAEA is an inadequate safeguard, and that the Iraqis at the time were using a civilian nuclear power plant as a cover for a nuclear bomb program. And they were correct in their evaluation of the strength of the IAEA and the real protections which they could build. So the test here is, have we strengthened the IAEA sufficiently? Are we giving them the tools that they need? Are we going to be able to rely upon it as an agency? Because if that's the case, then whether we like it or not, that's what the Non-Proliferation Treaty calls for. And I don't like it, but we have a system, and we just have to ensure that there is, in fact, adequate safeguards in place. So, Ambassador Burns, as you look at these safeguards and look out to the 2020s and the 2030s as Iran has a ever-growing civilian, peaceful, quote-unquote, nuclear program, how do you view the IAEA and its ability to be able to detect violations going forward?
I've listened carefully to Secretary Moniz, who's a fellow resident of our state, and I think that he's right in making a convincing case that we're going to have effective line of sight on the existing facilities. I would answer your question by saying the IAEA needs to be strengthened for that second role, which is after 2015, after the 15 years has expired.
2030, yes.
2030, excuse me, where the danger will be a covert program that Iran could elect, not will elect, but could elect to follow. And I think the IAEA will need more resources, a greater number of skilled, experienced inspectors, contributions from nation states. There's no question that has to happen.
So that's a test then for the P5+1 and every other country in the world. Are we going to give the resources to the IAEA in order to be able to do its job, especially as these years expire and the initial focus, interest of the world begins to recede a little bit? So what confidence do you have that the P5+1 and others are going to be able to keep their focus and to put those resources in place?
It's going to be a test of American leadership. My experience when we created the P5+1 in December 2005, that was the Bush administration, we were effectively the leader of it. We had the greatest interest. We kind of drove that organization. In an odd sort of way, the Russian government never deviated from the P5+1 because it doesn't want Iran to become a nuclear weapons power. China's somewhat disinterested. It's kind of on the margins. So we need to rely on the Russians. That's difficult. And need to rely on the Europeans to strengthen that organization.
Yeah, and that's always a big question because, you know, President Reagan actually instructed Jeane Kirkpatrick in the UN to vote to condemn Israel for what it did. Ronald Reagan, Jeane Kirkpatrick. And then they sided with Iraq against Iran in the Iraq-Iran war within just a couple of years. So you're right, going through the years, you have to have some kind of confidence that we're going to be able to keep a coalition together to be able to keep our eye on the IAEA ball so that we are, in fact, looking at the real issue, this horizontal proliferation, not vertical, horizontal proliferation. So could you comment upon that, Ambassador Burns?
I would, and I think this is the key issue for me at least. And Senator, before you came in, I just painted a picture. I think there's real benefits and there's some risks. I think this is a close call. I think the benefits outweigh the risks. But what I'm worried about is, can we be effective in implementing the deal, and a lot of that will come down to the inspection and verification regime. Some of it nation states can do. Most of it the IAEA has to do, and that agency needs financial support, and it needs an increase in its budget, and that's an agency that actually operates on behalf of American interests in trying to sustain the non-proliferation regime.
I agree with you, because otherwise, if it is ineffective, we wind up spending 100 times more money to deal with the consequences of its lack of real teeth. It just becomes a paper tiger, and we wind up spending more money with the collateral consequences of that. So let's, if we can, and I'd like for you to expand a little bit more about what potentially we could do for Israel, for Turkey, for other countries in a regional defense posture to deal with this issue of what Iran might be thinking about and what, in your opinion, the United States should be prepared to do from a conventional perspective in order to ensure that this does not result in a so much more muscular Iran that the price was too high to pay. What would we have to do here in order to make sure that was not the case?
Some of the supporters of the nuclear deal, not so much in the administration but outside, have said that we should normalize in effect, our relationship with Iran. We can work with the Iranians on the Islamic State and other issues. I see it very differently. I think as we pursue the nuclear deal, and I think we should, we need to push back against the Iranians. Two things we can do. President Obama has already started a strengthening of the Gulf cooperation countries, their military capacity, air defense, that kind of thing. We should continue that. The Saudis will be critical, and the Emiratis as well in this regard. Secondly, very important with Israel, I think we've got to close the political gap. There's a big public division, and it's incumbent upon our government, as well as the Israeli government, to try to, we're not going to end the disagreement, but try to put it out of public glare because it's weakening both of us. Israel needs a qualitative military edge. It needs advanced military technology. I fear that the Iranians will enable Hezbollah and Hamas to test the Israelis again in northern Israel, and some of those Hezbollah missiles can hit any city in Israel, as well as Hamas in Gaza. We've got to defend Israel and help it defend itself. The 10-year U.S.-Israel military assistance agreement is about to expire in 2 years. I know that's now being renegotiated. I think we should accelerate those talks and really try to narrow the distance between us and give Israel the support it needs.
And I agree with you. I think that we have to, again, evaluate this deal, looking at the advantages and the defects that may exist in it, and then try to make the best judgment. But no matter what, we have to make sure that Iran fears Israel, that Hezbollah fears Israel, that Hamas fears Israel. And we all have to agree on a bipartisan basis that no matter what happens, that that is the one non-negotiable on this issue, because that ultimately is how we'll negotiate from strength and trying to resolve these regional issues where we're pushing people towards the table to find a peaceful resolution of these historic, oftentimes religiously driven differences. So that's, from my perspective, what we have to evaluate as we're going forward. I think we can accomplish that latter goal. And I thank you, Mr. Dubowitz, for your work as well. The chairman was good enough to have you come in and talk to us for 2 hours, so I apologize for not asking you questions because I had that opportunity in private. But we thank both of you for your service, and we thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.